Okay, so given your position there, what can we do about gun violence? If you're against background checks by the government, is there any other system we could use to keep criminals from getting guns? And what can we do in general to just curb this pandemic of violence that we've seen in schools and in theaters?
So
What can we
to,
do?
to first address the issue about criminals getting guns, you're never going to stop it. Unfortunately, it is impossible to stop because you can technology has gotten to the point where a gun can be made at home. It is simple enough. You can 3D print a gun. You can make a shotgun out of $20 in parts at Home Depot.
Right.
With no background check, just because you're buying PVC piping and clapboard. And you can arrange those in a particular order that they function as a shotgun. Okay, so if you want to keep criminals from getting access to that, you need to ban information. When you start banning information, now you get into free speech and limits on what people are allowed to learn or innovate or tell each other or exchange with each other. And that becomes a market regulation. Never going to happen. You are never going to be able to stop criminals from getting guns because even if you could successfully shut down the black market 100%, which is where criminals do the vast majority of their purchasing of guns, is through the black market. Even if you could shut that down 100%, they could still make them at home. In fact, there's a great documentary. It's a YouTube documentary, it's like 20 minutes long, that talks about a lot of the ghost guns, the illegal guns that come into Southern California and the United States. And one of the most popular frames is the 1911, the Colt 1911. And they're talking about how these aren't actual Colt 1911s. These are non-serialized knockoffs that are being made in Brazil by people in their homes for under $20 and then being shipped to the United States. You're not going to be able to stop that information from spreading.
Right.
And so stopping criminals from getting guns is a non-starter. It just will not happen. And once you accept that that will not happen, the only alternative is to recognize that self-defense is a critical and important right. And that, again, we as a citizen militia are responsible to keep the state and its agents in check as a measure of accountability. But we as individuals are responsible to keep the undesirable and criminal elements of society in check as a measure of accountability for our own personal safety. And then at that point, it becomes a matter of personal responsibility. Every home needs three guns. And I'm going to quote Killer Mike, the rapper from Atlanta right here. Every home needs three guns: your revolver, your shotgun, and your AR. Because they each serve different purposes. Your revolver keeps you safe when you walk to and from your car. Your shotgun keeps you safe from the man trying to rob your home. And your AR keeps you safe from the government trying to take the other two. So every home needs three guns, and I'm a firm believer of that. The problem is education. How do we stop the school shootings, the outrages of violence in schools? And is it video games? Is it TV? Is it the media? Did too many kids watch Joaquin Phoenix as the Joker and get an idea about their teacher? I don't know. But what I do know is that the NRA, in its heyday of great activism, before they became a demogulous organization that just hated the left more than they loved freedom,
right,
used to sponsor firearms education at the elementary level. Kids were taught gun safety. Kids were taught firearms education, gun safety, and firearms discipline, and had a healthy respect for firearms. And at that time, there was no gun control. You could order a rifle from a catalog at Sears, and it would show up in the mail. The United States Army used to run a program called the Civilian Marksmanship Program. The Civilian Marksmanship Program was designed to teach young children marksmanship. And it was coordinated with the Boy Scouts of America and the Department of Education in individual states, because at that time there was no federal Department of Education. But the United States Army used to deliver pallets of ammunition to elementary and middle schools across the country. Not for storage in the case of redeployment or tactical reasons. No, because the United States Army understood the importance of having every American raised with a healthy respect for firearms and an understanding of how to use them safely and what their purpose and method was. And the United States government at that time recognized that the people were sovereign and that the people had a responsibility over the government. And that's one of the programs I'd honestly love to see revitalized. But the core of it, I don't even think it's necessarily just the fact that kids aren't taught a respect for guns. Kids aren't taught gun safety. Teachers don't carry guns into school anymore. I'm actually not a fan of requiring teachers to carry guns. I think that's idiotic. I think if a teacher is licensed and trained and wants to carry a gun, that's their right. But Republicans talking about requiring teachers to carry guns. I want to pay a teacher to teach my kids algebra, not be their bodyguard.
Right.
And it should not be something that's on their conscience and a way to something they have to do.
Yeah.
But even when I was in high school, it was not uncommon to see, and I'm only 30. I wasn't in high school that long ago. But there'd be trucks in the parking lot with shotguns in the rack.
Right.
Just there. And I lived in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
Of all places. I went to high school in Massachusetts, an incredibly liberal state. But it was not uncommon to see high school kids with shotguns because after school, if you didn't play football, if you didn't play soccer, you went to kill geese. It was what you did. And I think that kind of culture, a healthy respect for firearms and sporting needs to be brought back, especially the sporting aspect, because I believe mental health in school children has been neglected at this point, where it's created the environment where, combined with no knowledge of respect or firearm safety or methodology, the kids see firearms as a solution, as I have played enough violent video games that I know I can kill somebody with this gun. They're pissing me off. I don't want them to be a problem. I'm not being bullied anymore. I'm going to shoot them up. I know I can get a gun from granddad's closet.
Right.
And I'm not saying get rid of the video games. I'm not saying get rid of the violent TV, but maybe we do need to have a focus on resiliency in kids. Maybe instead of some of the useless classes that we're teaching in schools, maybe we should actually have some focus on mental health resiliency. And again, when I was in the Army, that was a huge part of an active Army unit. We were trained for combat about 30% of the time. 30% of the time was mental health training. Everyone's in a classroom, you're in breakouts, you're working with each other, because PTSD and depression are such major issues in the military that it became necessary for the military to dedicate such vast portions of its time to training resiliency in its troops and training mental health in its troops, and focusing on the fact that we were losing more troops to mental health than we were to combat. We're losing more kids to mental health right now than we are to gun violence.
Yeah.
And I don't believe the two are not intertwined. I believe that it does need to be a joint approach, a focus on gun safety and education, as well as a focus on the mental health of children, and maybe reevaluating how schools are structured. You never hear of a charter school getting shut up. You never hear of a Montessori school getting shut up. You never hear of a private school that does self-structured learning where kids can learn at their own pace and do their own thing getting shut up. You hear of public schools, usually in poorer areas where it's a one-size-fits-all track, where kids are held back and they're not getting the education they deserve, where they don't have healthy outlets. Those are the schools you hear about getting shut up. And it's unfortunate because it's predominantly disprivileged kids on the lower end of the income spectrum who are experiencing the negative side effects of these things. There are a few outliers, of course. Things like Newtown, Connecticut was an extreme outlier. And unfortunately, I think the only reason it got the attention it did because it was a bunch of rich white kids.
Yeah.
If it was just another inner city school shooting, Newtown would never made news.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, if you do look at the statistics that the left puts up about school shootings, 99% of them are inner city minority majority schools.
Yeah.
These are disprivileged kids. These are kids who don't have healthy outlets provided to them because the schools aren't funded correctly. They aren't structured correctly. They're not built to give kids a fighting chance. And the mental health of these children suffers because of it. And I don't think it's appropriate to blame guns. I don't think it's appropriate to blame the right. I don't think it's appropriate, but it's a little bit appropriate to blame the NRA. The NRA went away from what they did as a great organization. They used to be a phenomenal, great organization that did wonderful things for gun safety and education, and now they're a demolutious lobbying group who spreads fear and hatred. And so I do think they could bear a little bit of the blame, but not nearly as much as they get.
Right. And I just want to point out to people watching who are skeptical, but we've had high-capacity semi-automatic weapons for like 80 years, so it's not the newer, bigger
Right.
guns.
Yeah, the idea that the founding fathers could have never envisioned automatic weapons is a misnomer because they used them. Automatic weapons were actually commonplace during the Revolutionary War, the puckle gun, and in naval and shipboard combat. So they didn't write the Constitution saying, except those ones.
Yeah.
It was to keep in their arms.
Right.